Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. These are the words that God spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, who was the assistant of Moses. Now, in the previous chapter, Moses had actually died, and the people of Israel, who've been waiting for 40 years for a promise that God had given them, was about to be led into the promised land by God's newly appointed leader, and his name was Joshua. Joshua's task was not an easy one. He was to lead just under 2 million men, women, and children, and that included livestock, belongings, materials. There were so many things that, logistically speaking, were a nightmare to deal with. And that's not the only thing that he was about to do. He was to bring them over the Jordan River, and he was to go and conquer the entire land of Canaan, which was already inhabited by some really dangerous people. We find in the book of Numbers that God had commissioned Moses to send out 12 spies, of which Joshua was one of them. And when they returned, they found out that after 40 days of surveying the land, that the land was indeed beautiful. It was full of milk and honey, but they were inhabited by giants, and the Israelites, were grasshoppers compared to these people. Military troubles were on the way, and Joshua had to deal with these. And finally, we learned in the book of Deuteronomy that God had predicted that these people, the Israelites, were going to be hard-headed. Can you imagine the spiritual warfare that was going to take place? I mean, they were going to be disobedient. They were going to be betraying the God that they promised to obey. These three challenges perhaps sometimes sum up the challenges that we ourselves go through in our lives. We want to move our family to better and cleaner and greener pastures financially, and perhaps to prosper them, but we find it challenging at times. Or perhaps we want to conquer a land, or we want to conquer a situation, but the obstacles that are in the way are just so overwhelming, and we're just like grasshoppers in front of them. Or perhaps the spiritual warfare that ensues because of our fears and our doubts, and even our disobedient hearts at times. But God here gives Joshua a command that we can apply in our own lives today. He says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Now he says, have I not commanded you? It's because he's actually commanded these more than once. This is the third time in this chapter alone that God told Joshua to be strong and courageous. Now, the word strong here isn't talking about his physical strength, but it's talking about a firmness and a determined desire to obey God's will. Are you determined to obey God's will, brother or sister? And he not only says that, he says, be of good courage. And this courage is more of a confidence in the midst of the challenges. You know that God has some commandments for you to follow, but if you don't have confidence that these are the right things to do because God says them, well, you might not be strong enough or determined enough to obey. He also says, do not be afraid. And I would venture to say this, it's just don't be afraid of the situation. Brothers or sisters, whatever situation you're going through, perhaps a health issue or a family being sick, God says don't be afraid. He might even say, don't be dismayed, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope in those times, because God is saying He's going to be with you wherever you go. And that's one of the greatest comforts that we could ever hope to have. God promising to be with us. He says He is with us. And so, brother or sister, I pray that you would obey the voice of God today as He says to you, be strong, be courageous, don't be afraid, don't be dismayed, but know and trust that God is